Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, pro-Palestine protesters gather in Lexington, Kentucky, chanting anti-Semitic slogans. Beshear endorses Biden for president. Will this affect the governor's race at all? And then I'll go over what I did to upset not the left or the right, but actually the country of England last week on social media. But as always, that last portion, that last subject, me upsetting the entire country of England, that will only be available to our podcast listeners. So that means if you want to hear that last story, head on over to Spotify, Apple, iHeart, Pandora, Amazon, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, and go ahead and listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show there, and you can catch that last story. But otherwise, without further ado, let's dig down into it. So we had a protest in Lexington recently to deal regarding the Israel-Palestine war, fight, conflict, whatever, Hamas-Israel fight. And as you all know, I do not typically cover national issues on this podcast. I like to talk about the local side of things. And I'm not going to dig down into a whole lot about the Israeli conflict with Hamas. We all have our own, opinions on it, and so on and so forth. Generally speaking, I'm personally of the opinion that America needs to mind its own business in a lot of places and stop sending our tax dollars everywhere. Because, if we mind our own business, maybe Israel would have been able to deal with Hamas a long time ago instead of our constantly shifting political policies in this country, asking them to continue to allow a country to just fire thousands of rockets at them and allow that to happen. But I'm just going to put that to the side. We're not going to talk about that. Okay. Because I know there's a whole lot of neocons out there too, licking their chops, trying to turn this into a war against Iran, which is, just awful and typical from neocons. But anyways, I want to talk about the local aspect of things, and regardless of where you fall, even if you're somebody who thinks, Israel somehow has been doing something wrong or something else, I want you to listen to what they had to say at this protest in Lexington, Kentucky, and we'll kind of break it down here and cover exactly why, especially what they said at the end was so anti-Semitic or anti, the Israel country itself existing. We'll see what they have to say here.
Become the channel of resistance for the oppressed Palestinians who couldn't use their voices to resist the systemic racism and Israeli occupation. We are pictured as barbaric terrorists. That's not who we are, and we know that.
We want to help our brothers and sisters. That's it. Give them a voice for the voiceless.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
All right, so you heard a few different points. One, they started off, and several of their points were just, hey, we're not here to support a war against Israel or anything else. We just want Palestine to be free of, Israel occupation. Israel, being mean to the Gaza Strip. I guess that's what they consider to be Palestine. Because you see, the problem is, last I checked, there is not a country called Palestine, though they have dictated the areas they want to be free. And you heard that in their chant. So they say, look, we're not here. We're not pushing war. We're not saying anything else. We just are worried about Palestinians being subjected to hate from those darn dirty Jews. That's what they're saying. Okay. But they're saying, so they start off by saying, look, we're just here. They're being oppressed. We're just speaking for the voiceless. You heard them say that. They're racially oppressed. Systematic racism, you heard them say, is oppressing the Palestinian people in the Middle East. But then they finish off with a chant that is from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And what they're talking about is they're talking about from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. Apparently, these people have decided that that area needs to make up all of some country called Palestine, I guess. I don't know if they don't think it can be multiple countries. But when the thing is, when they're talking about that area, is they're talking about an area that has Israel in it. That is why that chant is, quote unquote, I guess, anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. And you can say that, well, being anti-Israel or saying Israel shouldn't exist isn't anti-Semitic, to which I say, what are you talking about? How is that not? Because simply put, we have countries that exist. Last I checked, you're allowed to, practice whatever religion you want to in Israel. Last I checked, people practice the Muslim faith in Israel. And so simply saying like, look, we believe we want to replace the Israeli government with a Palestinian government, with a Muslim government, an Islamic government. Well, that does mean the complete and utter destruction of Jews and the Israeli state because, surprise, surprise, Islam and Muslims typically in that area, especially, don't like Christians or Jews. We'll kill both of them. And it is funny to see people that are clearly leftist. I mean, this first woman talking in this protest in Lexington, clearly a leftist, using leftist talking points like systematic racism and oppression. A leftist talking point. And it's funny to hear that and to see so many lefties in the country navigating and drifting towards this group, this Palestinian group, who would literally, they talk about, those rude conservatives just want women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. A lot of these so-called Palestinian countries, Islamic countries, Muslim-run countries, don't even allow women to drive or go out in public without a man, or a woman has to be covered from head to toe, where if you're gay or trans or any of these other things, you get your head chopped off. And yet they float over to supporting these people. They call it colonialism. They say Israel's existence is just colonialism. And the bottom line is that the entire conflict is biblical in proportions. I don't mean that in a, some sort of allegory. It's literally biblical. Like the fight in the Middle East goes back thousands of years. This kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier, where, the hubris America has to inject itself into wars that have been going on between people for thousands of years, wars that are based upon the fact that somebody else shouldn't exist. But yet we have individuals, like I said, right here in Lexington, Kentucky. According to news reports, over 100 people they think attended this event in Lexington protesting the existence of Israel. And they'll claim that it's somehow not against Israel, but how do you chant? From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. An area that includes Israel, unless you're talking about the fact that you want to see Israel itself removed. That's the only thing that makes sense with that chant. You could say, look, I think, the atrocities being committed on the Palestinian people is awful by Israel. But that's different than chanting a chant that requires Israel to be gone. And also, you got to think of the timing. What a weird time to be so concerned about the Palestinian people when you literally just had an attack on Israel that resulted in women being, of course, raped and kidnapped and slaughtered of the young, the infirm, the women, children, everything. And it certainly looks like justifying of those actions when you gather in this way. Why weren't you protesting a month ago? If this was such an atrocity, if what Palestine, quote unquote, or the Hamas did was just in response to darn dirty, evil Israel, well, why weren't you protesting a month ago about this? But suddenly you're protesting now. So you certainly are pursuing and pushing for apologies to a group of people that is right now raping and pillaging and hostages, including Americans, or has killed at least, it appears has killed some Americans. And you're saying, you know what they deserve? An entire area that stretches from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea. And they should wipe out any government that currently exists there that will not support them in their quest and in their religious law. Because that's the other thing. is that when you see the Palestinian or the Islamic type governments come in, they have particular laws, and one of those laws is they're not particularly religiously tolerant. As we've gone over in prior podcasts, and it's been mentioned, is that the Muslim religion, as it sits, without it being reformed or somehow reinterpreted, does seem to push forward a rather violent view of murdering and getting rid of the infidels, or the people who have heard about the Muslim religion but do not convert. You can lie, you can cheat, you can steal, you can kill them. That's the general belief taught. And so, like I said, it's not belief necessarily held by everyone. There can be a reformist view that's being taught, but that's the general belief of a lot of these Middle Eastern countries. They're ran in this way. And to see that spilling over into Lexington, where we have protests like these, is pretty horrific. So with that in mind, I'm going to play for you again just some of the outtakes from the protest. And then,
Become the channel of resistance for the oppressed Palestinians who couldn't use their voices to resist the systemic racism and Israeli occupation. We are pictured as barbaric terrorists. That's not who we are, and we know that.
We want to help our brothers and sisters. That's it. Give them a voice for the voiceless.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
You know, it's also, having seen that again, and as they talk about it, it's also interesting to see, especially women leading the charge on this here in Lexington, when those same women leading the charge would surely not be able to take quite the same amount of leadership position in a Palestinian situation. Well, coming up after this, Beshear has come out and endorsed Joe Biden for president. What does that mean for the Kentucky governor's election? We'll have more after this short break. Listen up, my fellow business owners. You need to get your cybersecurity and IT support under control. Reach out to the folks at Amston today. Call 859-300-0087 or visit amston.com. It is no secret that cyber attacks have become a constant threat, and you need to make sure that your organization is protected. Amston has over 30 years of experience working with businesses and governments alike. Call 859-300-0087 or visit AmstonAMPSTUN.com today.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
In a interview recently, Beshear said a whole lot of things. He was pretty direct about. You know, one of the things he's asked about, of course, would be, you know, is he going to go to D.C.? There's been some speculation, especially after a win, that Beshear could find himself as a potential vice president nomination, a cabinet position, or even run for the Senate himself when his seat potentially comes up for election while he's governor. In order so that way he doesn't end up not in office when he's running for something, gives him that incumbency type feel. And in this interview, he committed he would finish out his full 4 years before he would do anything else, no matter if DC came and calling or not. And then in the same interview, he was asked about Joe Biden and whether or not he supported him for president. And Beshear responded saying he supports the president for a second term. So he came out and fully endorsed it. And jumping on this right away, the Republican Party of Kentucky tweeted this out. This comes from the Republican Party of Kentucky. Breaking news: in an interview, Andy Beshear at Andy Beshear KY, but it's Andy Beshear, of course, endorsed Joe Biden for a second term. Andy is out of touch on inflation, crime, and the border. Biden is bankrolling Beshear's campaign. That's why Andy will always put Biden ahead of Kentucky. And what they're doing here seems electorally smart initially. Obviously, Biden is a very unpopular president, unpopular in states like Kentucky. I believe in Kentucky, he only has a 32% approval rating. I believe something like that, 32%, maybe less than that approval rating. And so Biden is an extremely unpopular governor. And they are correct. Biden has given a fair amount of money to the Beshear campaign. He has helped bankroll that campaign, obviously through national ties too as well. But Democrats at large have put a lot into this race. Why? Because if they can hold on and continue to win in races like Kentucky, it gives them a whole lot of hope. If the Democrats can live in a state where their plus R, Republicans won, Trump won the presidential election like with 65% and was one of the first states called for Trump. But if a Democrat governor can hold on to their seat, that gives a whole lot of hope to Democrats and emboldens their far left radical ideas, because it says, look, we can be radical on transgender issues. We can be radical on LGBTQ issues. We can be radical on indoctrinating the kids. We can be as crazy as we want to be on the social issues. We can just be awful at all kinds of things. But with the right person, with the right message, we can still win elections. Now, something Beshear has going for him that obviously Biden doesn't is that Biden looks like a complete nitwit when it comes to the economy, and Beshear looks pretty good. And a big part of the reason why Beshear looks pretty good within the state economy stuff is because Beshear and his Democrat tendencies is not what's leading our economy in Kentucky. The Republicans have a 80 seats out of 100 in the House and 31 out of 38. So, the majority of the seats, of course, a super majority of seats in the House and Senate, and that doesn't look to be changing anytime soon. So, of course, their financial policies they're putting forward are a little bit better than what the Democrats' financial policies would typically be. Now, I would still love to see Republican policies that involve things like, spending less money, not spending more than you even said yourself you're going to. I'd like to see things like that happen, but even so, even without and regardless, those policies have still been pretty good for Kentucky. I think it could be a lot better if we adopted policies of unleashing our economy instead of trying to control it. But it has been better at managing the economy than Beshear would be, and better at managing the budget too as well than Beshear on his own would be. Because, of course, as we know, Beshear wanted to spend all of our money. Beshear wanted to expend all of our rainy day fund in his last budget, and it was the Republican legislature that put a stop to it. So how does this play in the governor's election? Well, let me give you a little bit of numbers so you can understand why I'm going to say this really doesn't matter. And people don't really care. Kentuckians don't really care about the national issues when it comes to their governor. So here's some fast facts, okay? Since 1900, there have been 7 Republican governors out of the 28 different governors we've had. We have never had Republicans serve back-to-back 4-year terms either. Now, I believe up until, was it mid-90s-ish? Maybe it's 99. I think it was mid-90s-ish. We've never had, governor terms were limited to 4-year terms. It was changed, of course, to 2 4-year terms in the 90s. So, but we never had even a Republican win back-to-back after a Democrat. It would go Republican for 4 years and then Democrat. And then it would sometimes be Democrat for 4, 6, 8 years, 16 years, 3 or 4 terms. And then it would go back to Republican over the course of that since the 1900s. But I say, well, recent history may be a little different. Well, since 2000, Kentucky has voted red in presidential races by wide margins. But our state house remained under Democrat control until the 2016 elections. So every presidential election since 2000, we voted red in, but it wasn't until 2016 that the Democrats lost control of our state house. And since 2000, all those times we voted red, only 2 out of the 5 governors that we've had serve from 2000 till now have been Republican, or 8 years out of 23. So while we have voted solidly red at the national level, We have not voted solidly red with our state elections. And there's a reason why, because in many voters' minds, they have divorced the national level Democrats from the good old boy blue dog Democrats that Kentucky has had. In their minds, they have. I'm not saying those Democrats have divorced themselves or not. I think many of them have shied away from it, but I'll give you a perfect example. One of the reasons why Kentucky really started to vote red deals with the Democrats' war on coal. As the Democrats came after coal, that really is what started pushing a lot of states that priorly have been good states for them, like Kentucky, to start to turn red, because though they didn't represent necessarily the values of Kentuckians, Democrats didn't. When it came to a few things, one of the things they did support was coal, especially to the coal miners. And so that led to a lot of support for the Democrats. But when they started going after coal at the national level, well, that started to make that push away. But people still voted for Democrats at the state and local and levels because they knew those people a little bit better. And those people weren't going after coal and all these other things. And a lot of times too, as well, they were pro-life Democrats. They were Democrats who were pro-life and also pro-gun, something that the Democrat Party really doesn't have left. So even if Beshear does win, trying to explain to the rest of the Democrats the only reason why a Democrat can win still in states like Kentucky is because we have got to go back to being a pro-life, pro-gun, blue dog Democrat in the South, the type that can win over Southern Republicans. I don't think he's going to be able to convince the rest of his party that that's the behavior they need to do. But with the endorsement of Biden, it leaves the question, is Beshear really that same type of blue dog Democrat? And while his words and his general demeanor say his actions speak differently. He has vetoed bills like the Born Alive Infant Act. What that was, Born Alive Infant Bill. What that was, it was a bill that if during an botched abortion, a baby was born, and it is alive during a botched abortion, you had to give it medical care and you had to treat it as if it was a baby born alive. He vetoed that, saying that if a baby during a botched abortion comes out alive, that doctors don't have to give it medical care. I mean, that's a belief he stated he had. Though in his interview here with the Herald Leader, he says he supports abortion up until viability of the fetus, generally 24 weeks, which is an interesting statement because, of course, the viability of the fetus comes back farther and farther and farther as medical advancements are made. And talking about viability of the fetus, why would you veto a Born Alive Infant Act if you believe that after viability of the fetus, it shouldn't happen? Of course, viability of fetus is the best way that he can split the baby. He doesn't have to say abortion up until birth, because if he did, even a lot of Democrats would turn away from that because nobody wants to see a 1 minute from being born baby be murdered. But if he says viability, well, that's something that the pro-life Democrats can still swallow while being able to vote for him, and the moderate Republicans can still swallow if those moderate Republicans still exist. And that's the other thing, is a lot of registered Republicans in Kentucky used to be Democrats and they used to vote Democrat. And so that really, it's not hard to get them to vote for a Democrat again. So while I understand RPK, Republican Party of Kentucky, and other Republicans will try to make hay out of Beshear endorsing Biden, I really don't think it makes a giant difference here. I really don't think it does in the grand scheme of things. I think that messaging on state level issues and pointing out Beshear's failures there is where you're going to find success at. I do not know why they have not messaged on the fact that Beshear's inability to manage juvenile detention centers has led to rapes and has led to disasters. I don't know why they haven't messaged on children sleeping on the floors of the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, pointing to the incompetence of Beshear. I don't know why they haven't messaged to the millions of our tax dollars he spends on crazy far left things that lets people know he's far left and he's stealing our money to fund those predations he has. I don't know why they haven't talked about it, but they should, because those are state level issues that voters will actually care about. Well, that's what I have time for the video watchers. But for those of you listening on the podcast format, stay with us because after this short break, I'll go over what I did to upset not the left or right last week, but I upset the country of England. The UK got blimey mad at me. We'll have more after this short break.